I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Guy Rosen, he is the co-founder of Onavo. And Onavo is a company that whose products help their customers use their data plans more efficiently. And Guy is here to share some insights and some background on why data really matters to the customers of your mobile apps. So I would like to introduce Guy Rosen.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Guy Rosen. I'm the CEO of Onavo. And I'm here to tell all of you why you shouldn't be data hogs. So, quick background. Onavo makes apps used by millions of users around the world. We help users get the most out of their mobile data plans by helping them understand which apps are actually using our data, and then also automatically making that data a lot more efficient. As probably one of the first, if not the first company to attack this problem from a consumer point of view, we've been fascinated to watch how the whole area has been developing over the course of just a couple of years. I mean, when we started out, 2010, consumers were by and large indifferent about data usage. Data plan, megabytes, who cares? Nobody really knew what that was. But that has completely changed. What we've seen, what we've been witnessing over the past few years is how this has become, as a result of events that are taking place and that I'll be talking about, this has become an issue that concerns consumers. Suddenly consumers have to worry about this kind of stuff. And suddenly things like megabytes and data caps and throttling have turned from kind of fringe technical specs to something that you might hear about on Today Show, for example. So that explains why I'm here today, essentially to tell you guys, developers, why data usage really matters. So put your hands, how many people here are actually coders, actually write code? Pretty much everybody did, developer day. How many of you learned to code before 2007? Okay, again, almost everyone. Well, you guys like me learned to code essentially in the good old days, before mobile really caught up. The internet was plentiful, and really the big steps in internet and network programming were kind of over the past decade and a half, where everything was broadband, you were always on, always connected, all the great new technologies, the web, HTTP, XML, web services, streaming, all of those came to life and happened because the internet was just there. Cloud computing, that wouldn't happen without the internet just being there. I call this the days of unlimited because for all intents and purposes, the internet was unlimited, bandwidth was unlimited, power consumption was unlimited. Nobody really thought about power or battery. And, life was good. If you were writing on a mobile device, it was a strange, very constrained, almost alien environment. Anybody here had the pleasure of coding in Groot? Yeah, sorry guys. Jake met me, probably a few more. It was strange, right? It was weird, and so you knew you were on a mobile device, you do things very differently, you didn't have the internet on tap. You even asked, remember this? Your app would ask for permission to use the internet. I mean, it's so quaint. Actually ask for permission. So this was the old days. Then everything changed. Suddenly, phones were just like everything else. Suddenly they ran Unix operating systems. They did TCP/IP. And writing an app for a wireless device was really no different from writing an app for a regular wired internet device. Everything was fun and easy. And we took all those great technologies from the web and from the internet and we moved them over to mobile, and data was unlimited, and so we just did the same things we used to do, we used the same patterns, and everything was great and unlimited. And again, fun and easy. Until it wasn't. So, 2010, essentially, because of the success of smartphones, mobile networks around the world are slowing to a halt. They're just breaking down completely. Operators around the world start to wave this white flag and say, you know what, we get it. We can't take this anymore. And they phase out unlimited. There's no more unlimited data. AT&T is actually the first one to make the move June 2nd, 2010. Days later, O2 in the UK, a big network, makes the exact same announcement. Verizon the next month. Like a domino effect, this reverberates around the world. And within the space of just a few months, suddenly every operator around the world is charging in some way for data. So suddenly consumers who were just used to the internet being always on all the time, just there, suddenly they have to buy a data plan, and it's measured in megabytes, which is kind of a weird thing. So you go into a store, they tell you, hey, you get 500 voice minutes. Okay, I get that. 1,000 text messages, fine. And you have to choose from 300 megabytes. What's a megabyte? Nobody really knows that. This is really a huge change in the way consumers suddenly have to come to grips with this strange resource, something that they weren't used to, something we didn't really have in the days of the wired internet. Now, I frequently get asked, is this really inevitable? Isn't this just a temporary thing, and in a couple of years we'll all be back to unlimited, everything will be fun and easy again? If you ask around the industry, the consistent answer will be a firm no. Because it's just not sustainable. Unlimited data is not sustainable. It's kind of easy, because if on the wired internet, demand grows, so you want to increase capacity. So you lay more fiber, you add more servers, and you fix the problem, you've got more capacity. In the wireless internet, we're up against physics. There's a real problem. We have limited spectrum. There's only so much we can fit into that piece of spectrum. And no matter how much demand grows, we can't just magically expand capacity. So that means demand is exploding, supply is limited, so basic economics 101 says that there will be a price tag on this commodity, and that's the data plan. That's why data plans are going to cost money. Now, the thing about data plans and what causes a lot of frustration is this. So let's see what happens. So users download and use your apps. Right? These apps then use up data, which flows through the carrier's network. The carrier then counts that data and bills the user. So something's kind of weird here, right? The user is paying for data which is essentially being used by the app. That's a huge disconnect. And that's the reason that there's so much frustration around this topic, because users don't really have any control here. The key problem is that essentially, as developers, it's not really your problem, is it? Now, here's the thing. These users care about it. And I'm not asking you, as developers, to care about the carriers. Sorry, AT&T guys, but that's not your problem. You need to care about the user. You do care about your users, because you're building great apps, you're adding functionality, and you care about experience. Well, here's the thing. Network efficiency makes a big difference to the user experience. Users care about this, and so as developers, your users, you should care about this as well. The fact is, the vast majority of users today are on capped data plans. So this is a piece of research. 71% of Americans, 92% of Europeans are on capped data plans. This is actually a pretty old piece of research, and the actual numbers are likely to be a lot larger. This means that most users really need to think about this. And consider this, there are different kinds of users. Some users have a big data plan, some have a small one. Some have plenty of megabytes left this month, and others are nearing the end of their cap. And they're getting all these frightening text messages from their operator, and they're all stressed out about it. And yet your app is kind of blissfully doing whatever it does. The worst off, by the way, are roamers. We're paying like $20 a megabyte. So that means the smallest action by an app, let's say a little analytics service ping, or maybe a quick update check. Boom, that costs them a cup of coffee, just like that. So think about these different kinds of users with different requirements. This cartoon, I like it because it demonstrates that while there are great things that we can do with mobile and wonderful user experiences that we can create, there is another side to it, and we need to keep that in mind. There's a trade-off here between stuff you can do with data and the cost of data. And the thing is, these different kinds of users, big data plans, small data plans, and so on, may have different requirements. I mean, I know apps, you would like your apps to have the best possible experience in terms of high-definition video and 300 kilobit audio, pixel-perfect images, and real-time data that pings away every second to some web service. Well, maybe not everyone needs that. Some users maybe do want their feeds to update every second, but some don't. Some users will want, great 300 kilobit audio. Some won't. Let the users choose, because different users will have different constraints, different requirements, and you can actually make the users a lot happier if you give them those varying levels of choice, essentially, so that they can manage their trade-offs. An issue where this becomes interesting is when your app is pulling in data from a service that you don't run, from a third-party service. And hence, that service is actually the one generating the data usage. A good example of this is an app I like a lot, Pulse News. Anybody here know Pulse News? Anybody here from Alfonso? Yeah, okay. Great app, big fan. So Pulse News used to be, at our company, the poster boy for being a data hog. Sorry. Every time you open the app, it would pull in like 20, 30 megabytes, just like that. And that's, recall, most users are on like the 300 megabyte data plan. That's really difficult. And the reason was simple. So for each so Pulse is a news aggregator. So for each feed that I'm subscribed to, for each item, it would go and download all of the images to build these great thumbnails. And it looks beautiful, but here's the thing. It would pull it in directly from the source. So let's say if the editor at TechCrunch decided to put this really high resolution picture, let's say one of those massive infographics that spans 5 pages, Pulse would download that blissfully unaware and would rack up a lot of data usage. And then the user would end up saying, hey, but why is there so much data going to Pulse? Now, luckily Pulse fixed that. And now it pulls in data from a web service that pulls in the data first, reformats it to be suitable for these little thumbnails on my feed, and sends it to the mobile device without causing all of this grief. So be aware of third-party services as well. Essentially make sure that you control, as developers, the data that is moving in and out of the device, in and out of your app, because that counts, because you will be held accountable. Let's talk about something else, battery. Who here thinks their phone has a great battery? Has good battery life? They have a feature phone? No. Battery, is something that has basically not changed within, the past decade and more. Yet our phones are using ever more power, and it's another thing that we should be aware of. Because as a rule, an app that uses data, an app that hogs data, will also hog battery. These things go together. A nice piece of research by a former colleague of mine, Valeria, analyzed Google Play Store reviews. So he did some textual analysis of all the reviews on the store and found that battery usage was the 5th most popular reason that users would uninstall an app. Now you may ask, okay, that's number 5, what about 1 to 4? Well, those are actually the basics. So it's malware, permission, storage issues, and crashes. So essentially, if your app actually works and it's not malware, this battery is the next thing that users will complain about. So it's really important. Network efficiency and battery efficiency go hand in hand. And the bad thing is, the bad news, is that it's only going to get worse. So here's a great piece of research by a company called Qnovo that helps handset manufacturers improve battery life. So they compared battery usage and power drains on different networks. So what we see here is 2G, 3G, and LTE. Now, look at that massive jump. So essentially, what they found is that while on a 3G device, the radio and the display kind of compete for who is the biggest power drain. On LTE, radio wins hands down. That's the big red one. In fact, if we add up RF, transceiver, and modem, all of whom are involved every time you send and receive some data, they add up to 65% of battery usage. That's massive. So more than ever, the amount of data you use, the level of efficiency in terms of how you use the network will be critically related to power consumption and to battery life. And your users will care. They will complain. So this is just from a quick search on Twitter, people complaining about data usage. Some big apps as well, Wall Street Journal, Flipboard, Twitter, Pandora, Reddit. When an app misbehaves in terms of data or battery, users will notice, and they will care, and they will complain, and they will judge your apps for it. The fact is that today, more than ever, there are more tools to help users understand which apps are actually using the data, such as our own app. And as a result of this, there's a lot of transparency. And so users will know, they will see that your app is using up a lot of battery, or that it's using up a lot of data. And they will care, they will complain. So it's something definitely to keep in mind, because data usage really matters. So, quick summary, what have we learned today? So, essentially, we're up against physics, hence mobile data is a scarce commodity and it costs money. We have data plans. Mobile data uses up battery, and users they absolutely hate battery hogs. And of course, as developers, we want your users to be happy, we love them, and if we combine all of those, the logical result is please don't be a data hog. That's all for today. Thank you. Yeah, questions?
Sure. Questions?
Any questions?
Or someone's pointing out, raise your hand real high or right here.
In terms of measuring power consumption, this is sort of like one of the issues I've had with a friend of Rosen. Do you run into some problems on iOS? I was looking at your app in terms of what the data you can get from iOS versus Android. It seems like what you guys do, you're going to get more information out of Android, or maybe I'm just completely wrong in that respect.
Yeah, so API-wise, information-wise, Android is a little richer. You have battery usage, you have data usage now built into Ice Cream Sandwich and up. On iOS, it's a little trickier. So you have some third-party apps, such as ourselves, that help, such as our own apps, that help you measure data usage. Battery is trickier. There's some apps that claim to do it. They don't really do that. There's no good way today to actually measure per app battery usage, at least on a regular, on a consumer level. As a developer with a jailbroken device, there are all sorts of fun things that you can do.
Have you found it harder to analyze data usage on LTE networks specifically because of all the encryption that's happening?
Not really, because the data usage, at least the way we analyze it, is on the device side. So whatever's happening, down there in the lower levels is kind of irrelevant. I mean, pre-LTE 3G signals are also encrypted, and they have lots of layers beneath the basic TCP/IP. So by simply measuring, is what Android does at the OS level. It tags each socket and keeps the apps accountable, and then tracks how much data was sent per each process. So on the basis of that, it then calculates the data usage. There will be always some discrepancies between the data usage that we see on the device in apps and the data usage on the network. There will always be a little bit of that, and I think there was a good study about this just over the past couple of weeks, because of these different layers, and because sometimes if there are reception problems, packets will be transmitted but not received, and so things will kind of get lost along the way, and they may be counted towards the user's bill, but they won't be actually seen on the device. That happens, but by and large, measuring data for all the different kinds of networks is pretty much the same once the OS supports it. Yeah?
Do you have good recommendations for using data plan along with that Wi-Fi?
Sorry?
Let's say if I have an app that actually can take advantage of, so let's say if I build an app that can take advantage
use that. And moreover, if there are actions that you can postpone, do that. A good pattern to look at is the way iTunes, for example, syncs up only on Wi-Fi, iCloud. Your app should do that as well. Your app should wait, and if it sees that it's on a 3G network, maybe it should take a step back and wait till it's on Wi-Fi, and then only perform whatever sync it needs over Wi-Fi. Definitely much more efficient, typically faster, and doesn't cost the users money.
Other questions? One more. There's another question out there. Here we go.
So I get it. I've been a Nano consumer for about a year now. I like it, right? It saves on my data bill. But what's the number one reason you hear from developers for not wanting to or not seeing enough benefit to not being data?
From a developer point of view, it's the disconnect that I talked about earlier. Because as a developer, you don't feel the cost of data directly. Your users will feel it. They will get charged. They will get, if they're roaming or if they're on a small plan, they will get overage fees. But as a developer, not your problem. You're not paying, and so you're less incentivized. But the thing is that because of the increased transparency into what is actually using up data, users know more, and they will be able to call you out and complain and keep you accountable. So as developers, it is something that you should look into. Question in the back.
Okay.
Who is the rational owner of fixing the problem? I mean, you guys are doing a great job of providing data. Does it make sense for the carrier to provide some sort of guidelines around best practices for auto transcoding for the best format? Is it the developer's job? Where's the rational way for everybody to pick it up as a best practice for best control?
So the best practices for being data efficient?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's more or less the topic of the next hour, right? So that's a great question.
But who's the rational owner of it? Is it the developer, or is it the carrier, or a combination of the two?
It's a combination, because the carrier is kind of feeling the pain. Users, by the way, when they get angry at their phone bill, they don't call up you as a developer and say, you used up my data. They're starting to do that and complain, right? But they will call up the carrier and say, hey, what is this big bill? I didn't do this. It's not my fault. It's some app I downloaded. So I've heard this across the board from carriers around the world that they're kind of frustrated that users think they're to blame, when essentially it's not them, it's the app. But the app developers say, well, it's not my problem, like we said, and the users are kind of caught in the middle here. So I think by essentially transparency will force developers to take note of this. And I think at the end of the day, developers need to solve these problems. Carriers can and should provide advice and tools and best practices to help make your apps more data and more network and more battery efficient. But at the end of the day, if you're an app developer, nobody's going to force you to do something one way or another. So it really is up to you at the end. Any more?
One more?
Yeah, one over there.
Yeah, I have a friend, he's on AT&T, and he has like 200 megabytes, he's on to Spain, so he ends up using more than 200, and then they charge him twice as much. So if he had like a gigabyte plan instead of 200 megabytes, then he would actually save $5. Myself, I had like 500 megabytes before, and then I upgraded to a gigabyte. So the whole data plan thing is not an issue for me. But because of this, like, they just charge you twice as much if you go above the limit. I don't see that carriers are too concerned about that, because they make money.
They are concerned, because at the end of the day, the reason that they charge is, again, simple economics, is essentially to incentivize you as a user not to use, not to exceed your TAM. It's not just about revenue. because networks, remember, all of this happened because networks were collapsing. If all of us were only on 3G, using as much as we wanted, never switching to Wi-Fi, the network would collapse. It just would not work. And so it's all about pushing users and saying, hey, if you want to use 3G, you can, but there's going to be a price to it. How they build the different data plans, of course, the economists will be smart at that. Median data usage in the US is roughly between 200 and 300 megabytes. So it's not surprising that the cap is also, it used to be 200, now it's 300 megabytes, at least on AT&T. Smart move, because people will frequently kind of just miss that by a little bit and get charged. But at the end of the day, the reason that we're here, and that we have the session just after this one, is essentially to help users use less data. Because that data is just bringing down the network. It's causing user experience to deteriorate, and that's just bad news for everybody.
We'll just do one more. There was a gentleman in the back corner.
Back.
And that'll be our last one.
Hi, I'm Deep and I'm from Pulse. So I just wanted to give you the example that you mentioned. We have actually improved a lot on our data usage using basically a CDN and ensuring that we reduce our usage. So that's when we point out that we are working on getting our data usage down. And I'm sure if you can give us some tips on that.
It would be interesting to hear a point of view of a developer. I mean, here's an app developer who changed and did work, invested resources in making an app more network efficient. And I think it'd be interesting to hear the story, from your side on what that meant and what was how much were you feeling the pain?
So we were feeling a lot of pain, and this is probably the Pulse 1.0 where you mentioned we were using a lot of data. Since then, we have actually built an image cache, and it is now a significant, we have spent significant amount of resources in developing an image cache, and doing a lot of infrastructure costs, and we're also using the AR to reduce the monitor network resources.
Right, thank you.
All right.
Anything else?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.